Today we're going to talk about 6-card Pot Limit Omaha, and we have our PLO Mastermind coach Benny on the line because this Monday we have a 6-card PLO course launching that has been put together by Benny.
Hey guys, yeah, super stoked to be here. Let's just get started right off. In this very first one, we find ourselves in the small blind with a very beautiful hand, triple suited, Queen, Jack, 10, 7, 6, 5. It folds to us in the small, and we have a clear open raise. Obviously, we're fine with just taking down this blind uncontested if we can, and our opponent decides to 3-bet his hand. In 6-card, usually you have not a big incentive to be putting in stacks pre-flop because obviously you're just at the mercy of variance. We don't really push a lot of equity because in 6-card equities just run razor thin between basically any 6. Like even if you run like top tier premium aces against like random 6 disconnected trashy cards, you don't even get above 60% of equity. So usually you build your win rate by going post-flop as often as possible. However, there's two main factors that will contribute to you increasing short-term variance and just building a pot pre-flop by 4-betting such a hand. And that's first of all, position. So if you find yourselves out of position post-flop more often, you want to try and reduce the SPR as much as possible because obviously in 6-card PLO, it's such a dynamic game that the privilege of having position post-flop is just insanely valuable. But then again, what are the kind of hands that you want to do this with? And our particular hand right here is actually a perfect candidate to do so because we have 3 suits and we have decent connectivity that is, however, very almost non-nutted even. So if you just decide to flat this hand, you're going to still play at a relatively high SPR out of position with a non-nutted hand. And this is like a disaster spot because you're going to be forced into passiveness or even to just give up straight up entirely on so many kind of runouts that you're just never going to realize your equity, frankly. So what you're going to do in this spot is just push your hand in because you know no matter what's going to happen, you are going to have a decent chunk of equity no matter what. And you're also going to be able to realize all that equity. And if we see what's going to happen in this exact spot, you're going to see just how perfectly this particular hand actually performs here. So we 4-bet, our opponent decides to stick it in. And if we check out his hand, we're going to see that our opponent does, in fact, have pocket aces. But in this spot here in 6-card, it's actually so that we are almost a 60% favorite. And that is against pocket aces. So from our opponent's shoes, he's like, yeah, I got aces. Of course, I'm going to 3-bet and get this in. I should be printing, right? But actually, he's trailing by such a large margin, even though he has the made hand and we have just this drawing hand. Pocket aces in general in 6-card are really they need to be treated really carefully. They have such a high dependency on their 4 side cards. They just need additional backup to perform well. And if you take a look at these additional side cards, like 4 deuce, deuce, 8, with just 1 single nut suit, not a great hand at all. I mean, if you just want to finish the hand, we do flop him pretty much semi-dead, secure the entire thing on the turn, and just scoop the pot very nicely. So we see an open raise from the cutoff, button calls, small blind calls. The thing is in this spot, because of the dynamics of 6-card, it's as extreme that you basically either 3-betting or folding this hand. Even if we do face a 4-bet from the cutoff, we just saw how well these kind of triple suit connected, low card heavy hands actually perform against pocket aces. So if our opponent once again maybe finds super marginal aces to 4-bet with, I mean, we're printing again, like close to 60% probably. In this spot, we decided to squeeze, looking to get heads up if possible. And if we do get 4-bet, we're just sticking it in. It's a good spot to gamble if it happens. Now, in this particular scenario, we actually achieve exact thing that we wanted to. So the cutoff player calls and the other 2 get out of the way. And now this hand just plays so much more smooth because on a flop like this, now we just have middle pair. But due to the connectivity and the abundance of combo draws that this hand is actually able to flop, we now have like a inside wrap, right? Like a 7, a 9, a 10, a jack is making a straight. We have 2 backdoor flush draws and we have a pair. So super easy to just stick it in. Our opponent shoves the rest in and we're going to see what we're up against. So he actually had aces once again. Not that worse, not that poor aces as we saw before. And once again, look at the equities right here. We're 68% favorite, and we are the drawing hand. And he's actually blocking some of our outs and we're just crushing him.
Shouldn't he just 4-bet preflop and get this in?
With these aces, he should. Yeah, definitely.
What is the SPR on the flop? So assuming he requires something like 38% equity, it seems pretty thin, because like, how is he gonna win the hand? I would almost think in 6-card PLO, you gotta think on this flop, how are you gonna make something close to the nuts? Like, probably you need to make a boat or a straight or a backdoor flush. He has no backdoor flush, and it's very hard to make a straight in his shoes as well. So how is he going to be in, like, if you have aces, any random aces that decide to squeeze, he's basically dead. I mean, he needs to he goes for a chop or he's going to lose. If you have anything else in aces, he's even in worse shape, I would imagine.
Yeah, all I really need is like a pair and a gut shot, and he's already trailing in 6-card. Like, because of all these backdoors, it's so easy to have backdoor equity in this game that it's just gonna be recognizable on the flop right away, and he has to account for that. So yeah, his hand actually, because it doesn't have any backdoors and no immediate redraws, is just a fold at this point. But people don't really, once they've put in money and see like there's only so much to call, they're just never folding. I mean, he played it perfectly because he's gonna win, but what's also interesting to see, let's check out the pre-flop equities. Yeah, we actually ahead by 50 to 54%. It's pretty sick, right? I mean, he's blocking one of our flush draws. He has 10-8 blocked as well. He has aces and kings, but still our hand is ahead equity-wise. We see it folds to us, clear open, beautiful hand. Also, if, for example, now again, let's say button decided to 3-bet us, this would also be a great 4-betting candidate, once again, just like the hands before. But now we just get 3 callers. So as I said already before, it's kind of troublesome because our hand is going to face some issues with regards to nuttiness in such a multi-way setting. Now, the flop, however, comes in probably the best way possible. So we flop the nut straight, we have redraws to higher straights, and we have a flush draw. A straight flush draw even to the 7 of hearts. And back then I felt like, okay, this should be good, right? I mean, be it a multi-way spot or not, we have all the draws, all the redraws. Let's just build a pot. So it checks to us, and we bet like 3/4. And in this particular scenario, our opponent re-raises us. I mean, we're never folding, of course. The other 2 get out of the way. And the thing is, of course, we get it in, and we run into the absolute mega cooler. But this was not, when we planned this meeting, Fernando was saying like, can you find spots where you can show when a cooler is really not a cooler? And this is like the perfect spot to show that. And I also prepared something in Odds Oracle to support this argument, because now we're trailing by, I mean, we just have 26%, which sounds ridiculous. And also the hand we run into, I mean, it's the worst possible because he has the mate straight himself. He has 2 pair and a higher flush draw and all the redraws that we have, so it doesn't become much worse. But I also checked the same kind of setup in a multi-way scenario where all I did was give one player a higher flush draw and the other player a set. And we already, in that situation, we're barely getting to 30% of equity. And this is not something that is going to occur like rarely. People can easily have a higher flush draw and some sort of set. And this doesn't even account for the spots where they have this mate straight as well. So we're just completely drawing that and running into a negative free roll. Be it with flop nuts and some couple of redraws or not, they have to be nutted. The more players are in there, the more you have to just be so far on top of the nuttiness for you to be able to build a pot. So in this particular spot, it's actually a mistake to be betting here, even though you have the mate straight and a couple of redraws.
When you approach a spot where you potentially are going to play a big pot, like here on the flop, you want to ask yourself, is there a setup where I'm going to crush someone equity-wise on the flop if the money goes in? And then flip it around. Are there setups where I'm completely crushed? And there's no setup here on the flop where you just have a stranglehold on your opponent and you're like, I'm just dominating him and he couldn't get away from it. There's no such setup, but there are many setups where you get it in 3-way on the flop, or even if you don't get it in, but you get called by 1 or 2 players. How are you going to win this hand on the turn in the river? And also, how many setups are there where you are actually dominating an equity? And there's just none, basically. I guess the primary instinct of betting on the flop here is the protection idea. And I think that probably has to be revisited. We're looking at a 4-way pot in 6-card PLO. Like, you're not going to get your opponents to fold. So protection is way less important, I imagine, in 6-card than in the other games where you can actually deny equity.
All right, then let's hit up the last hand. We see an open from the button, and small blind 3-bets us. This is definitely going to be strong and good enough for me to just cold call this. Also, I'm not expecting to get 4-bet a lot here from the button because small blind is already 3-betting. Button range should be pretty wide. If he does decide to 4-bet, it's a pretty disgusting spot, and we're probably forced to fold because this hand does not perform well equity-wise in a potential 3-way stack-off. But it's worth the risk being so deep with the guys to see a flop. Small blind checks, we obviously also check, and the button player checks. And now the interesting thing happens. We make trips on an extremely draw-heavy, dynamic board that also offers potentially made straights already. The preflop aggressor goes ahead and bets small for roughly a third, which kind of surprised me and also didn't make much sense for me. Even if you had, let's say, like 7-5, like the absolute goods, there's still so much potential for bad runouts that actually make you still lose, because any overcard is basically bad. Doesn't even have to be that your opponent is going to have 7x plus a higher kicker, but it could also just be that someone floats with like aces with a flush draw, for example. So you would have to actually be more concerned and not apply such a small size. I think if you actually had 7-5, you would be much more so putting this into your check raising range, because this is also a board that you can expect one of us, like me, the cold caller, or the button raiser, to be stabbing quite a lot. So from all of this, I picked up that I don't think that he's really particularly strong here. And at the same time, my hand is really, it's trips, but it's not that good as it is right now. And also, there's many runouts where my hand can just be obsolete instantly if I don't boat up. So from all of this, I decided to just turn my hand into a semi-bluff by raising. I think I could have raised a little bit smaller, just like make it maybe 3x, maybe a little bit less even, just so that if he suddenly does show up with 7-5 and sticks it in, it doesn't hurt as much for me to fold, because we're actually forced to fold if he does so. But yeah, I'm also expecting tons of folds here, because as I said, his line doesn't convince me. And what this accomplishes is that we're not as much at the mercy of variance to make our hand when we just decide to flat call. Because the moment we flat, we can't really wrap any kind of strong made hand anymore. We're not going to have 7-4. We're probably never having 7-5 here. So in that moment, if we break out on the river, or like there's a queen of hearts or something, it's not really convincing if we then suddenly turn our hand into a bluff by just shoving it in. He might actually find calls with like a nut flush here. And what happens is actually that he decides to call. The river actually does break out. And if we just flat called in the spot, it would be really difficult for us to actually be wrapping something that can push out like 6-8, other kind of straights. So now we're in the driver's seat, because we can actually now wrap convincingly that we have like a full house already. We have the best possible blocker. We're unblocking hands like aces plus hearts. He checks, we shove the rest in, and he also snap folds. You need to clearly understand in 6-card when is your made hand turning into a potential bluffing candidate. And I think this is the perfect scenario to do exactly that.
On Monday, we're going to drop a video where we talk more about theory, or Benny is doing so, more about 6-card, and also what the course entails. Again, it launches on Monday alongside the video here on this YouTube channel. Thank you very much, Benny, for joining today.